Welcome to Sci-Fi Traveler, friends. In this episode, I'll be telling you the story of Jack, a human, and Bella, an alien. Grab your coffee and sit back. Sci-Fi Traveler is about to begin. The alien woman said, "Why are you staring at me?" I panicked and said, "Because your hips are very nice." The thing about the coffee dispenser on Deck 9 was that it had been broken for 11 days, and Jack had reported it 11 times. And each report had been swallowed by the harbor master's authority the way a black hole swallows light, thoroughly, silently, and with no apology. So when Jack tells you that the reason he was standing at his customs kiosk staring across the concourse instead of logging the morning's cargo manifests was that he was simply resting his eyes, you should understand that Jack is a liar, and not even a good one. He was staring because of the woman. She had a table near the seed stock stalls, in that golden slice of the market where the station's fake sunlight pooled thickest, and she wore it like it belonged to her. Oren, obviously, yellow-skinned, the warm shade of afternoon honey rather than anything sickly, with long tapered ears that swept back past her jaw and twitched, ever so slightly, whenever a haggling customer said something she found stupid, which was often. She had a way of standing that suggested she had never once in her life worried about where to put her hands. Every third person who passed her table looked twice. She ignored all of them with the serene, practiced disinterest of someone who had been looked at so many times it had stopped registering as an event. Jack, to his eternal shame, looked more than twice. He looked in the way a man looks at a solar flare, helplessly, and knowing he'll regret it. "You've scanned the same crate 4 times, said the kiosk's inventory system, in the mild, disappointed tone Anthropic's cheapest custom software reserved for staff it had given up on. "It contains dried noodles. It contained dried noodles the first 3 times. "Recount," Jack muttered, waving the scanner at nothing. "There is no recount. There are noodles." He would like the record to show that he tried to stop. He genuinely did. He put his head down. He logged a container of agricultural fertilizer, 2 crates of second-hand grav plating, and a single deeply suspicious shipment labeled ornamental rocks that he was fairly sure was not ornamental rocks. He kept his eyes on his work like a professional, like a man of dignity, like a 28-year-old adult with rent and a functioning sense of self-preservation. Then he looked up again, just to check the time. The chrono was, unhelpfully, mounted directly above her table, and that was the exact moment she caught him. There's a particular horror to being caught staring that transcends species, language, and the 11,000 light-years separating human awkwardness from Oren poise. She didn't startle. She didn't blush. Jack wasn't even sure Oren blushed, and he had a brief, unhinged flicker of wondering whether they turned a deeper gold. She simply met his eyes across the entire width of the concourse, held them for one long, deliberate beat. And then worse, so much worse, she began to walk toward him. Jack considered his options. He could pretend to receive an urgent transmission. He could duck behind the kiosk and live there permanently, becoming a local legend, the ghost of Deck 9. He could open an airlock. All of these felt more survivable than what was actually happening, which was that she was crossing the market floor with unhurried certainty, weaving between stalls, and people were turning to watch her go, and she did not care. And in roughly 4 seconds, she was going to arrive. She arrived. She planted both hands flat on his kiosk counter, leaned in, folded her arms, and looked at him with an expression that was not angry so much as thoroughly, dangerously curious. "Why?" she said. "Are you staring at me?" Now. In the half-second that followed, Jack's brain offered him a truly generous buffet of sensible responses. "I thought I recognized you. I was checking the chrono." "Was I?" "Sorry. Long shift." Any of these would have worked. Any of these would have preserved his dignity, his employment, and possibly his lifespan. His brain laid them all out neatly, like a waiter presenting the good wine. And then his mouth, operating with the full and unsupervised independence of a mouth that has decided its owner has lived long enough, said, "Because your hips are very nice." The words left him. They could not be recalled. Somewhere in the deep architecture of the universe, Jack was fairly certain, A cosmic ledger noted the exact time of death of his self-respect. He felt every drop of blood in his body arrive in his face at once. He wished, with a sincerity that bordered on prayer, that the deck would simply open and drop him into cold vacuum, where at least he would stop existing in a reality where he had said that out loud. The Orin woman blinked. It was not the reaction she'd braced for. He could see that in the small hitch of her expression. She had come over expecting an excuse, a denial. The usual squirming retreat of a man caught looking, the mumbled sorry, didn't mean anything by it. She had, clearly, been ready to enjoy his discomfort in the abstract professional way one enjoys watching someone else step on a rake. She had not been ready for this. Something shifted in her face. The curiosity cracked open into surprise, and the surprise, slowly, mercifully, catastrophically, bloomed into a smile. It started at one corner of her mouth and spread until it reached her eyes, which lit with a bright, delighted, thoroughly unfair mischief. One long ear gave a single, involuntary twitch. She tilted her head and looked him up and down, taking in the whole crimson, mortified length of him with the frank appraisal of someone reevaluating a purchase she'd assumed was junk. "Huh," she said. "At least you're honest." And instead of walking away, instead of laughing in his face or reporting him, or doing literally any of the 40 things Jack had already begun apologizing for in advance, she reached out, dragged the empty stool from the corner of his kiosk, and sat down beside him like she'd decided the afternoon had just gotten interesting. "I'm Bella," she said. "Your coffee machine's broken, by the way. Everyone on this deck knows. You should really fix that." "I've filed 11 reports," Jack heard himself say, faintly. 11. She propped her chin on one hand. Behind her, half a market's worth of customers watched their most watched merchant abandon her stall to sit with a beetroot-colored customs clerk, and understood none of it. "You poor thing. Start from the beginning." It became a habit before either of them noticed it becoming one, which is how the best and worst things always arrive. Bella took to appearing at the kiosk during the market's dead hour, that limp stretch of afternoon when the freighter crews were sleeping off their shore leave, and the concourse went quiet enough to hear the station breathe. The low, patient hum of air scrubbers, the tick of the fake sun dimming toward its fake evening. She would bring 2 cups from the working dispenser 3 decks up, hand one to Jack without comment, and settle onto the corner stool like it had been installed for her. Jack, for his part, spent those first several days engaged in a doomed campaign to seem interesting. This is a difficult thing to attempt in front of a woman who has crossed the actual void between stars, and Jack attempted it anyway, with the grim determination of a man bailing out a sinking boat with a teacup. He mentioned, with what he hoped was casual worldliness, the time a smuggler had tried to bribe him. He did not mention that the bribe had been a coupon. He referenced the Kessel run of paperwork, a joke he was quietly proud of, and watched it die in the cold vacuum of her polite blink. He described the customs system's more baroque tax loopholes, as though they were duels he had personally won. "You know an alarming amount about birthing fees," Bella observed on the 4th day. "I know an alarming amount about everything on this station," Jack said, and then, because honesty had already ruined his life once this week, and clearly intended to make a hobby of it, added, "It's the only thing I'm good at. I can't fly, I can't fight, I've never been anywhere. But I know every code, every fee, every blind spot in Varine's whole customs grid, which is a bit like being the world's foremost expert on a puddle." She laughed at that. A real one, surprised out of her, warmer than the polite market smile she wore like armor. Jack decided on the spot that making her do that again would be his life's work. He learned in pieces what Varine actually was, from the perspective of someone who arrived at it rather than someone who was stapled to a desk in it. A neutral hub, she called it, wedged in the twitchy no-man's space between 3 powers who each considered the station theirs, and would each go to war before letting either of the others have it. A stalemate the harbor master's authority had spent 40 years monetizing with breathtaking, bloated efficiency. "They tax everything that breathes," Bella said. "And a few things that don't. I got charged a gravity maintenance surcharge last week. The gravity has never once stopped. That's the surcharge. It's a fee for the gravity's continued excellent behavior." That's real, Jack confirmed. I file those. You're part of the problem. I'm the smallest possible part of the problem. I'm the part of the problem that can't afford coffee. She smiled again, but it flickered this time, and her gaze slid, the way it had that very first hour and every hour since, toward the crate under her table across the concourse. A plain gray shipping container, sealed, unremarkable, the kind of thing Jack processed 100 of a day without a second thought. Except Bella looked at it the way you look at a sleeping thing you're afraid of waking. When he'd asked about it on the first day, she'd changed the subject. On the second, she'd changed it faster. By now, he'd learned to watch the flicker instead of chasing it. So, she said, too brightly, dragging them both away from the crate by force of will, I should confess something, since apparently we're an honest kiosk now. I'm a little behind on my birthing fees. How behind? The kind of behind where a man with a clipboard has started saying my name in a friendly voice, which, in my experience, is the sound a trap makes. Jack laughed, and she laughed with him, and it should have been fine. It was a small, ordinary confession. Half the independent traders on Verine were juggling their fees, robbing Doc to pay Berth. He almost let it go. But he'd spent 3 days watching her face, and he'd gotten good at it. Better than he'd gotten good at anything except puddles, and he saw the thing underneath the joke. The birthing fees were true. They were also a curtain, hung quickly, over something much larger and much worse, and she'd shown him the curtain precisely so he'd stop looking at what it covered. He thought about the crate. He thought about the flag that had, in fact, appeared on his queue that very morning. A manifest kicked up the chain by the authorities' automated systems. One cargo container attached to one small, independent trade ship, tagged for secondary inspection. Priority hold. He'd seen the ship's registry. He'd seen the name of its sole owner and operator. He hadn't mentioned it. He'd told himself he would, once he understood what it meant. That evening, after Bella had gone, Jack sat alone at the kiosk in the dimming light and looked at the flag on his screen for a long time. Secondary inspection. Priority hold. All he had to do was let it run. That was the whole of his job. To let the system do the thing the system did. To be the smallest possible part of the machine. The puddle that reflected whatever was poured into it. Instead, with a small and specific horror at himself, and the clear knowledge that he could not unknow he'd done it, Jack opened the manifest, buried the flag 3 subdirectories deep in a defunct customs category labeled Decorative Gourds, Interspecies, and closed the file so the authority systems would forget it had ever existed. He didn't even know what was in the crate. He only knew whose it was, and that she'd smiled at him, and that some quiet, reckless, previously undiscovered part of him had apparently decided that was reason enough. You, said the inventory system mildly, have just done something stupid. I know, Jack said. There is no gourd category. You invented that. I know. The system was quiet a moment. She does have very nice hips, it offered, which Jack felt was deeply unprofessional, and also the first true thing the authority had told him in 11 days. They came on a Tuesday, though Verine didn't have Tuesdays, and Jack was only ever certain of the day because the fertilizer shipments arrived on it. So in his private calendar, the men who nearly got Bella killed would always be associated with the smell of concentrated nutrient slurry. There were 2 of them, and they wore the soft, expensive neutrality of people who want very badly to be mistaken for something dull. Their coverall said Agricultural Inspectorate in reassuring green. Their boots said we have kicked indoors. The taller one had a smile that had been installed rather than earned. They went to Bella's stall first. Jack watched from across the concourse with the particular helplessness of a man witnessing a thing he cannot stop and cannot look away from. Watched her whole body language change. The easy golden confidence folding down into something smaller and more careful. Her ears going flat and still against her skull in a way he'd never seen them do. Whatever the tall man said to her, quietly, pleasantly, it made her go the color of a held breath. She smiled back. It was the worst smile Jack had ever seen. It was the market smile stripped of everything warm, worn purely as a shield, and it told him more than any confession could have, that the birthing fees had never been the problem at all. Then the tall man's eyes drifted, idly, toward the gray crate under her table, and Bella's hand moved, just an inch, just an aborted flinch toward it. And the man saw the flinch, and Jack understood with cold clarity that in about 10 seconds, 2 agricultural inspectors were going to open that crate, and that this could not be allowed to happen. So Jack did the only heroic thing available to a customs clerk. He committed a bureaucratic atrocity. He stood up, knocked his stool over, jogged across the concourse with the flustered energy of a man whose entire career is on fire, and inserted himself bodily into the conversation. "Inspectors, thank God. Deck 9's been waiting on a full agricultural recert for weeks. You would not believe the backlog." He was already tapping his scanner, already generating forms, already speaking in the dense, hostile dialect of pure administrative process, which is the one language on Varain more feared than a drawn weapon. "I'll need your inspectorate credentials, your authority cross-clearance, your phytosanitary bonding number, and, this is the big one, your Form 9 Delta interspecies contamination waiver. Because if you touch a sealed container on my deck without a 9 Delta and it turns out to hold live biologicals, that's not her liability, gentlemen. That's yours, personally, individually, and the fines are indexed to the gravity surcharge, so." The tall man's installed smile developed a hairline crack. "We don't need. You absolutely need a 9 Delta." Jack had no idea whether a 9 Delta existed. He was inventing it in real time with the confidence of a man who processes fictional gourds for a living. "I can file the request now. Processing time is, let me see." He made a show of checking. 4 to 6 working cycles. "Faster if you've got a bonding number handy?" "No. No bonding number." He clicked his tongue with deep, sorrowful professional disappointment. "Then I really can't clear you to open anything. Health and safety. My hands are tied. Take it up with the harbor master." For one terrible second, the tall man looked at Jack with a flat, assessing patience that had nothing agricultural in it at all, the look of a predator deciding whether a small obstacle is worth the effort of removing. And Jack held that look while every organ in his body tried to leave through his shoes. Then, because a station full of paperwork is precisely the kind of place where invented forms sound plausible, and because these men clearly preferred not to make a scene under Varain's cameras, the smile reassembled itself. "We'll be back," the tall man said, "with our bonding number." And it was not really about the bonding number, and everyone present knew it. They left. The slurry smell lingered longer than they did. Bella did not thank him. Bella grabbed him by the sleeve, hauled him behind her stall's awning where the cameras had a blind spot Jack himself had once catalogued, and said, in a low, furious voice with her ears pinned flat, "What is wrong with you? I'm sensing this isn't gratitude. You just put your face in front of the Vor Syndicate. You, a man who cried over a coffee machine." "I did not cry. I filed a strongly worded, 'Those people do not send a second warning, Jack. And now they've seen you. They know your deck. They know your name is on my manifests." Her voice cracked, and the anger underneath it turned out to be fear all the way down, and that was so much worse. "You have to stop. Whatever this is. You have to go back to your kiosk and forget you ever saw that crate and let me handle it. Because I can survive it, and you can't, and I am not going to stand here and watch you get erased over something that was never yours to carry." "What's in the crate, Bella?" "Nothing. Birthing fees. Gourds." "Bella." And she looked at him, and something in her gave way. Not all of it, but a seam of it. And she said it fast and flat and quiet, the way you say the thing you've never said out loud so it won't have time to become real in the air. Her homeworld colony. The blight, 40 years ago, a designed thing that ate the crops and then ate the people who'd grown them, that had swept the settlement clean in a single dying season while the three powers, now squabbling over Varain, argued about whose problem it was until there was no one left to be a problem. She had been small. She had been carried out. And the gray crate under her table held the seed vault, the last living genetic archive of everything her people had ever grown and been, every strain and lineage and stubborn spliced hybrid, dormant and whole and irreplaceable, the only piece of them left alive in the entire galaxy. And the Vor Syndicate wanted it, because a thing that cannot be replaced can be sold for anything. And she was trying to get it to a refuge station 3 jumps out before they took it. And she was doing it alone because everyone who could have helped her was already dead. Jack was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay? That's it? Okay? Okay, I'm not going back to my kiosk." He picked a fleck of fertilizer off his sleeve with enormous dignity. "But I'm keeping the fake form. The 9 Delta's the best thing I've ever made." And across the concourse, unseen by either of them, a bloated man in the harbor master's tower had just watched the whole exchange on a camera Jack had forgotten to catalog, and had begun, with the slow pleasure of a spider feeling its web twitch, to calculate exactly what a one-of-a-kind, irreplaceable thing might be worth to 3 separate buyers at once. The betrayal, when it came, wore a very good coat. The harbor master's name was Theodore, and he was the sort of large, soft, beautifully dressed man who had never in his life done anything as vulgar as breaking a law himself, when the law could be quietly bent to fetch things for him. He didn't send enforcers for Bella. He sent a summons, a genuine, valid, gorgeously legitimate summons, citing her unpaid birthing fees, the very debt she'd used as a curtain, now weaponized as a door. By the time she and Jack reached the docking gantry, her ship was already sealed under an authority impound field, a shimmering amber lattice of light, and 2 officers were rolling the gray crate down the ramp on a grav sled toward the tower's secure hold. "Standard procedure," one of them recited, not unkindly. "Impounded goods held against outstanding debt pending auction. You can bid to reclaim your property, ma'am, assuming you're the highest bidder." "It's a seed vault," Bella said, and her voice did a thing Jack had never heard it do. It begged. "It's not, you can't auction it. It's not goods, it's my whole. Everything's goods," the officer said with the deep, sad philosophy of a man who has said it many times. "That's kind of the station's whole thing." They took it into the tower. The amber field held her ship, and Theodore, watching from a high window with a drink in his soft hand, had by now made 3 quiet calls. 1 to the Vor Syndicate, 1 to a Rothini acquisitions broker, and 1 to a coalition cultural heritage office that would pay a fortune to own the last of a dead people purely to deny it to the other 2. An irreplaceable thing, offered to 3 enemies at once. Theodore had never felt so pleased with the gravity's continued excellent behavior. Bella sat on the floor of Jack's kiosk that night with her back against the counter and her ears flat, and did not move for a long time. "That's it," she said finally, hollow. "It's over. I can't outbid a government. I can't outbid the syndicate. I had one job. One. The only thing anyone ever left me. And I lost it to a man in a nice coat over a birthing fee." And this, Jack would think about this moment for the rest of his life. This was where the puddle discovered it was actually rather deep. "They put it in the tower's secure hold," he said slowly. "Sublevel 2. Vault, behind a customs-grade lockdown." So I wrote the customs-grade lockdown protocol. Well, I filed the maintenance addenda on it for 3 years. Nobody reads the addenda. I read the addenda. Bella. He crouched down to her level, and for the first time since she'd met him, there was nothing flustered in his face at all. "I can't fly. I can't fight. I've never been anywhere. But I am the foremost living expert on this station's puddle, and that hold is inside the puddle. I know its access codes. I know its blind spots. I know that Sublevel 2 runs its environmental scrubbers on the same power bus as Docking Bay 6. Because some idiot, I'm the idiot, I flagged it and got told to stop flagging it, wired them together in a cost saving that was never fixed. I know that the auction can't legally proceed until the goods clear a final customs inspection. And I know who does the final customs inspection on Sublevel 2. Bella lifted her head. "Who?" "Me. It's me. I'm the final customs inspection." He spread his hands a little wildly. "They're going to hand me the vault to sign off on before they sell it. They have to. It's procedure. It's the one thing on this station that's stronger than Theodore. And it's the exact thing I've spent my entire useless life becoming the master of. Something moved back into her face then. Some spark of the golden mischief he'd fallen for across a market floor. You want to steal it back. I want to process it back, Jack said, with dignity. Through entirely fabricated but procedurally impeccable channels. There's a difference, and the difference is that I'll enjoy it more. What followed was the strangest and best 2 days of Jack's life, spent hunched over the kiosk with Bella at his shoulder, building a heist out of forms. It should be said plainly that they were terrible at this as a team, and wonderful. Jack knew the system down to its bones, but had the physical courage of a nervous rabbit. Bella had crossed the void alone but couldn't tell a bonding number from a bill of lading. He'd map a route through the maintenance ducts and she'd point out he'd routed them through a bay with active gravity. She'd suggest simply seducing the guard and he'd point out the guard was a bolted door. They argued about everything. They agreed about the shape of it. And underneath the planning ran a current neither of them named, the growing, terrible certainty that they were in love, wound tight against the equally growing certainty that people who love each other during a heist against a syndicate do not, statistically, get to keep each other very long. If this goes wrong, Bella said on the second night quietly, not looking at him, you were never involved. You buried a flag, that's all. You're a clerk who got fooled by a pretty smuggler. You go back to your kiosk. You cry over your coffee machine. You live. I don't cry over the coffee machine. Jack. And I'm involved. He didn't look at her either. It was easier. I've been involved since I said something insane about your hips and you sat down instead of walking away. I've spent my whole life being the smallest possible part of things. I would like, exactly once, to be a large part of something, even if it's a disaster. Especially if it's a disaster. Bella was quiet. Then she reached over, without a word, and took his hand off the console and held it. And her ears, which he had learned to read better than any manifest, came up off her skull and forward. And that told him everything the two of them were still too frightened to say. Okay, she said. Then teach me what a 9 delta is. If I'm going down fluent. The plan required a malfunction. And the beautiful thing about Verine was that it was so thoroughly broken that a fresh malfunction hardly registered as a crime. At 0400 station time, while the auction guests gathered in Theodore's tower, a Vor syndicate man in agricultural green, a Routhini broker draped in status cloth, a coalition heritage officer who kept a handkerchief pressed to her nose as though the whole station offended her, Jack, from a maintenance terminal 3 decks down, gently persuaded the environmental scrubbers on sub-level 2 to believe they were on fire. They were not on fire. But since they shared a power bus with docking bay 6, per a cost-saving Jack had flagged and been told to stop flagging, the false alarm tripped an automated pressure equalization in the bay, which dumped the lights on the whole sub-level, which forced the secure hold onto backup power, which EU, for exactly 140 seconds, ran its locks on the maintenance override protocol whose addenda Jack had personally filed for 3 thankless years. That's not going to work, the inventory system had told him, back at the kiosk. It's going to work. You're doing the confident voice. You do the confident voice right before you file a gourd. It worked. The lock cycled. Bella was through the hold door before the emergency lighting finished its first sullen flush of red, and Jack, heart going like a trapped bird, hands unsteady, courage of a nervous rabbit fully engaged, followed her in. Because being a large part of something turned out to mean your body went places your instincts screamed against. The gray crate sat on a shelf between a case of confiscated liquor and a box marked, Evidence. Do not. The sentence unfinished, as though even the label had given up. Bella put both hands flat on the crate for a second, just breathing, and then they hauled it onto the grav sled and ran. They made it exactly as far as docking bay 6. The thing about a plan built by 2 people terrible at heists is that it works right up until it doesn't, and it stopped working when they came around the final bend and found the tall syndicate man, waiting by Bella's impounded ship with 3 others and a weapon that was not pretending to be agricultural at all. Theodore, it emerged, had grown greedy even by his own generous standards. He'd told the syndicate the vault's location as a courtesy to a favored bidder, hedging, playing every side, and the syndicate had simply decided that buying a thing was for suckers when you could stand near it and take it. The amber impound field still shimmered over the ship. There was nowhere to run. Jack's heroic malfunction had delivered them, neatly, into the exact trap the malfunction was meant to spring. "The 9 Delta," the tall man said, almost fond. "That was you. I looked it up, you know. There's no such form." "There is now," Jack said. "I filed it retroactively. It's real. Ask anyone." The man's weapon came up, and Bella stepped between it and Jack. Stepped fully in front, arms spread, the vault behind her, her whole golden body a shield, and said, fast, in the flat voice of someone doing the arithmetic of the only trade left, "Take it. The vault. Take it. It's yours, all of it. Just let him walk. He's a clerk. He's nobody. He buried 1 flag. Let him go back to his kiosk and take the vault and let him go." And Jack understood that she meant it, that she was about to hand over the last living piece of her whole dead world, to buy the life of a man she'd known for 2 weeks, and that she considered this a fair trade, and that this was the most unbearable thing that had ever happened to him. So Jack, who could not fly and could not fight, did the one thing he had left. He opened a channel, not a quiet one. Every channel. He'd rigged the bay's comm array during the malfunction as a fallback he'd hoped not to need, and now he broke it wide open, station-wide, and past the station, on the 3 separate diplomatic frequencies the 3 squabbling powers monitored with paranoid devotion now, and he broadcast the whole tower, live, Theodore's voice on his 3 recorded calls, offering the same irreplaceable artifact to the Syndicate and the Rauthini and the Coalition at once, a neutral hub's harbor master caught red-handed selling a war-triggering relic to all sides of a Cold War simultaneously, the auction, the impound, the naked fraud of it, pouring out across every receiver on Varine and the frowning ships beyond it. The effect was instant and magnificent. 3 powers who trusted no one, and each other least of all, each now believed the other 2 had nearly bought a thing that could tip the balance between them, and each, in perfect furious synchrony, demanded the authority void the sale before their rivals could. The auction didn't just collapse, it became radioactive. Theodore's own greed, amplified through the paranoia of 3 governments, detonated under him. Within 90 seconds, the authority, desperate to look clean before 3 watching fleets, issued an emergency order voiding the impound, releasing all associated goods, and disavowing the harbor master entirely, and the amber field over Bella's ship snapped off like a guilty conscience. In the chaos, alarms, 3 separate diplomatic broadcasts colliding, the Syndicate man realizing his prize had just become the single most watched object in the sector and no longer worth dying to hold. Bella got the ramp open, and they threw the crate aboard, and they ran up into her ship as the bay doors, per an automated release Jack had queued 40 minutes earlier and forgotten to mention, began to grind open on the black. They stood in the cockpit, breathing like they'd run the length of the galaxy, alive, both of them, and the vault safe behind them, and neither could quite believe it. "You broadcast a harbor master committing treason on 3 government frequencies," Bella said, "to save my seeds." "I processed him," Jack said, "through entirely fabricated but procedurally impeccable channels." And then she kissed him, fierce and golden and unhurried at last. And when they finally broke apart, Jack, being Jack, incapable of leaving a beautiful moment unruined, said, a little breathless, "For the record, I stand by the hips thing. Still true. Started this whole." And she laughed into his mouth and kissed him again to shut him up, which was, he decided, exactly why he'd said it. The refuge station was called Hearth, which Jack thought was a little on the nose until he saw it. A slow green wheel turning against the dark, its whole hull threaded with growing things, vines pressed against the viewports from the inside, an entire station built by people who had lost their gardens and refused, on principle, to live without them. They came in on Bella's little ship 3 jumps, and 4 days later, the gray crate strapped down in the hold behind them, and when the dock crew learned what it held, the news moved through Hearth faster than any comm channel. By the time the ramp came down, there was a crowd, Auron, most of them, ears up and forward and trembling, the older ones weeping openly, because the seed vault Bella had carried alone for 2 weeks and a terror was not to them an artifact or a relic or a war-triggering asset. It was their grandparents' fields. It was the taste of a fruit no one alive had tasted. It was 40 years of We Are the Last turning in a single afternoon into We Are Not Finished After All. Bella stood at the top of the ramp and could not speak. So Jack, who had spent his whole life being the smallest possible part of things, stepped up beside her, cleared his throat, and said to a crowd of grieving strangers, "Right. So, I'll need someone with a phytosanitary bonding number to sign for interspecies biological transfer. And there's a customs waiver. It's called a 9 Delta. I invented it. It's completely real now." And Bella laughed, wetly, and elbowed him. And the crowd didn't understand a word of it, but they understood the shape of the man saying it. And they took the vault into Hearth's deep vaults, with the reverence of people carrying home the dead and finding them alive. The threads, once they began to tie, tied fast. Theodore did not survive the broadcast. He wasn't arrested. Verine didn't really do arrests. It did paperwork. But the authority, scrambling to look spotless before 3 furious governments, opened a formal inquiry into his conduct. And Jack, from a great and comfortable distance, had made certain the inquiry would find everything. The harbor master who had spent 40 years monetizing every breath on the station was, in the end, buried under the exact bureaucracy he'd built, drowned in the forms he'd taxed, each one now an exhibit. The Vor Syndicate, having very publicly nearly bought a thing that turned out to be radioactive with government attention, decided a seed vault 3 jumps into a refuge station under 3 fleets' scrutiny was more trouble than it could ever be worth, and quietly went to menace something easier. The 3 powers, having each been convinced they'd narrowly avoided being outmaneuvered, spent the following month so busy glaring at one another that they forgot the vault entirely, which was, Bella noted, the safest place a precious thing could possibly be, in the blind spot of everyone's suspicion of everyone else. And Jack quit. He did it properly, which is to say, he did it through the system, because he had come to understand that the system was the only weapon he'd ever truly owned, and he intended to fire it one last time. He filed his resignation from the customs desk of Deck 9, and attached to it, as was his right, he'd checked, he'd read the addenda, a formal maintenance grievance 11 days old, and now numbering 41 repeat submissions concerning a coffee dispenser that had never once been repaired. He CC'd the entire authority. He let it be his monument. Somewhere on Verine, he liked to imagine. A machine that had swallowed every one of his reports finally choked on the last. "You could have asked them for a medal," Bella said, watching him send it. "You exposed a treasonous harbor master. You saved a species genome, and your parting shot is a broken coffee machine." "The medal was never the point," Jack said. "The coffee machine was always the point. I contain multitudes. They kept the ship. That was the thing that surprised Jack most in the end. Not the adventure, not the treason, not even the woman, but that when it was all over and the vault was safe and he was, for the first time in his life, entirely free, he did not want to go anywhere except wherever her small salvage and seed stock ship happened to be pointed. He had spent 28 years as the world's foremost expert on a puddle. It turned out the cure for that was not a bigger puddle. It was an ocean, and a co-pilot, and a genuinely alarming number of arguments about routing. They had one of those arguments now, in fact, in the cockpit, 3 weeks after Hearth, drifting between jobs. Bella wanted the long route through the Meridian Belt because the salvage was better. Jack wanted the short route because the long one passed through a customs checkpoint, and he admitted, developed a professional grudge against a rival clerk there over a bill of lading. Her ears were doing the flat with amusement thing. His hands were doing the emphatic with forms thing. "You're arguing customs law," Bella said, "recreationally, in your free time, for fun, as a hobby." "I'm arguing customs law romantically," Jack corrected. "There's a difference. The difference is, you're here." She looked at him for a moment. The yellow-skinned woman who'd drawn every eye in a market and ignored all of them, until a beetroot-colored idiot told the truth by accident. The woman who had carried her whole world alone across the dark and did not, anymore, have to carry it alone at all. Her ears came up and forward. She reached over and took his hand off the console the way she had that first frightened night, except there was nothing frightened left in it now, just the settled warmth of a thing that had turned out, against every statistical likelihood, to get to keep itself. "Why are you staring at me?" she asked. She knew. She asked anyway. She'd been waiting weeks to ask it. And Jack, who no longer panicked, who had learned that honesty had never once steered him wrong even when it had steered him straight off a cliff, looked at her in the light of a fake evening that was slowly becoming a real life, and told her the truth. "Because your hips are very nice," he said, "and because I have nowhere else in the entire galaxy I'd rather be looking. But mostly the hips." She laughed, the real one, the warm one, the one he'd made his life's work, and pointed them toward the long route, through the meridian belt, past the checkpoint, into all the black and turning dark ahead, together and unfinished after all, and home. Jack spent 28 years believing he was the smallest possible part of everything, a clerk at a puddle, a man whose reports vanished into silence, someone easy to overlook and easier to forget. And then he told one accidental, mortifying truth, and it turned out that the truth was the only door he'd ever needed. Not courage, not cleverness, just the willingness to say the real thing out loud, in the exact moment when every instinct screamed at him to lie. We spend so much of our lives rehearsing the safe answer, the excuse, the polite retreat. We meet the person, or the chance, or the crossroads, and we reach for the version of ourselves that won't be caught, won't be seen, won't risk the blush and the burning face and the wish that the floor would swallow us whole. And maybe we survive those moments intact, but intact is not the same as alive. Bella carried her whole world alone because she thought no one would help her carry it. Jack shrank his whole life down to a puddle because he thought that was all he was allowed to be. Both of them were wrong. And what freed them wasn't a weapon or a fortune or a grand design. It was two lonely people who finally stopped performing and let themselves be seen. So let me leave you with this. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a truth you're not saying, because saying it feels like stepping off a cliff. A feeling you're dressing up as something smaller. A door you keep walking past because you're certain what's behind it isn't meant for someone like you. What if it is? What if the most embarrassing, honest, reckless thing you could say is the exact thing that changes everything? What if the ocean you keep telling yourself you don't deserve has only ever been waiting for you to stop apologizing for wanting it? Jack's whole life turned on a single sentence he was ashamed of. Ask yourself, tonight, in the quiet, what's the sentence you've been too afraid to say, and who might be sitting down beside you if you finally did? The end. We've reached the end of the story, friends. Before we leave, please don't forget to like the story, leave your thoughts about it in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. See you in the next story. Goodbye, friends.